Welcome back to our ContinuousX episode with Don McLean, our Chief Cybersecurity Technologist at TD SYNNEX.
Perhaps the most significant, or the one that caught my eye most immediately, is the sixth control group, which is our sixth control, which is SR6. That's Supplier Assessments and Reviews.
Right.
Let me say that again. Supplier Assessments and Reviews. Okay, that means they're going to assess your company, or they feel entitled to assess your company. That's typically going to involve examination of documents or possibly submission of documents in conjunction with an RFP response or a contract to ensure things like your FOCI situation is under control, that you've adequately divulged and controlled for foreign ownership and control and influence. Make sure that you have a plan and a way of communicating and enforcing your supply chain requirements on subcontractors below you if they're a prime contractor. Understand that they're going to be looking at every element of the supply chain. When they say elements, they actually define these and spell out what they mean by a supply chain element. That includes, take a deep breath, organizations, entities, tools used for the research and development, design, manufacturing, acquisition, delivery, integration, operations, maintenance, and disposal of systems, system components, or system services. Basically, anything that's involved, whether it's a thing or a person, is fair game for examination. And that actually is not the whole list. That was just the first sentence. They talk about
please don't continue. I have to do the subtitles for all of it. So that's not going to fit on screen.
Well, Don, is it fair to say that there's being money allocated to address this, or do you feel the first wave is more agencies pushing pressure on the vendors to do the attestation, to do all the supply chain, the SBOMs, everything to validate that they can continuously ensure that the quality of their product is meeting standards? What's the next wave after that?
Well, is it fair to say that money's being allocated? I don't know if extra money is being allocated specifically for this.
Okay.
Typically, the assessment process falls under the general security budget, which unfortunately is heavily weighted toward these compliance efforts. So I imagine there's enough money to cover what the government needs to do, because typically they're focused on compliance. And if they have to pull money away from engineering, that's typically what happens, or at least in my experience, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality. But I don't think there's any, to my knowledge, there's no money specifically earmarked to address this expanded scope of the document. Because keep in mind, I'm dealing with stuff that directly affects the vendors, or maybe indirectly affects them. But there's a lot in here that requires the government to set up their own supply chain management. They've got to do reviews. They've got to have a designated, person or team. They've got to have a plan. They've got to update the plan, all those kinds of things that we're not addressing here, because that's really for the government's own internal use. But all of those administrative processes will in fact impact, the vendors in ways that are also designated in the document. So that's what we're addressing here. But that's a long way of saying, I don't know, Rick, money beats me.
It'll get caught up in a modernization effort or whatever. It's just going to add more requirements to opportunities.
Yeah, there could be opportunities for companies that are trying to break in that have been locked out because they have a single source. There could also be a negative opportunity or a risk for companies that are used to being that single source, and now they may be forced to compete because of the diversification requirement, for instance. So these are just things to keep in mind. Keep in mind that your contracting team and your business development team and your team that responds to RFPs and so on may need to or will probably have to become conversant with supply chain issues. There's going to be they doubtless will require documentation of things like your FOCI compliance and things like that, or any of those other things that are designated with regard to contracting. And you probably need a plan, or at least some coherent way of communicating all of this to subcontractors, or vice versa. Expect it to come down the pike if you're a subcontractor, from your prime. So they also have notification requirements. And what they require there is if there is a compromise of the supply chain, which is inevitable, that's going to happen no matter how much care there is, because this is such a vast and sprawling, world in which we acquire things. I mean, I think there's a jet fighter that the Department of Defense was building that had 15,000 separate suppliers.
Right.
Most of us aren't dealing with that.
Sounds on the low side, yeah.
Yeah, most of us aren't dealing with that many, but that's an incredibly huge thing. So, in the likely event of a supply chain breach, there are specifics for notification. You'll be required to tell the government about a supply chain breach, or if they have one, they have to tell you, and you have to respond within a certain amount of time. So that's also something that'll be built into contracts. Your contracting and BD teams are going to want to be conversant with that. And then, there's a lot more in the devil of the details, but it tends to be, that very wonky kind of thing that I was listing on before I read out that long list of the elements, which is actually only partial. But I would urge listeners who are involved in any way with government contracting to become conversant with this. It's not really, kicking in just yet, but it's going to happen. And it's all part and parcel of, as I said, the greater scrutiny of the supply chain of the suppliers to the government, whether you're supplying services or goods and software. It's along the same lines as the CMMC requirement that's coming down the pike someday from Department of Defense. Where they're looking at how the defense industrial base is actually securing the data. What's interesting too here is that there are requirements not only to do certain things or to ask for the supplier base to provide certain things, but also to require them to secure the relevant documents as well. So that's just yet another thing to be concerned about. So I would get on this earlier rather than later. Think about how it's going to affect your business opportunities. It could be good, it could be bad, depending on your situation. Think about what your contracting team may need to be aware of and how they might want to, use. For instance, if you have a facility clearance, you probably have your FOCI documentation at the ready. They'll want to. If you don't, then you might need to make sure that you have that documentation and can provide it and keep it in one place and be ready to respond quickly to an RFP, or to build it into a contract without having to do too much negotiation and back and forth.
So there are partners who supply solutions to the public sector. A word of warning: this is not going away. The Chinese symbol of opportunity and crisis are intermixed. This is something that's not going away, and it would behoove system integrators to embrace the principles of DevSecOps, the principles of continuous improvement, and the ability to automatically update your software as quickly as possible and have that rotation being continuous. Not to steal our tagline, because it's never going away. There's always going to be vulnerabilities. Yeah,
and just as a quick aside, I don't want to make this a TD SYNNEX commercial, but we did just go through a supply chain audit, and we passed with flying colors.
Oh,
that said. It's a lot of work to get to where you pass with flying colors. It's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot, and our chief legal counsel was really responsible for that, Stacy Patel. I'd like to take credit, but sometimes
that's
other
fantastic.
people.
Well, I think we're out of time. Unless Mike, you want anything that you want to clarify? I want to thank the viewers for their time and attention.
Thank
Don,
you.
Always been an arbinger of things to come and things that are here. So we thank you for your time and efforts over these last couple of episodes. There's a lot to unravel. As we continue to solve for X in the SDLC equation.